people who are not here, and for those of you that want to go back and listen in. So, I'd like to kind of start with just some upcoming dates for you all. So this afternoon, the juniors will have their all-class mass here in the chapel. So you might ask your student about how that goes. We have spring break, of course, starting on this Friday. Then right after Easter, we have 2 Mondays in a row, which will be e-learning days. The other junior retreat will be in mid-April. So if they didn't go on the one in January, they'll be going to that one. I went to the one in January. Seemed like it went really well. I feel like the students got a lot out of it. So hopefully they're excited about that. And then I think I've alluded to this event that's happening in late April. So this will be an evening event. You might get some of the same information, but it'll be in a different format. So it's kind of a choose your own adventure style of program. I'll do probably a quick welcome in here, and then you'll get to choose 3 out of those 4 different sessions to attend. So I try to do some different ones to kind of cover a lot of bases. So one will be paying for college, and I think most of you, if you RSVP for this event, almost everyone, if you put a comment in there about what you want to know about, paying for college, financial aid, scholarships was one of those things. And I'll touch on that a little bit today, but we'll have a full presentation next month. There'll be one on athletics, since we have so many students that are interested in participating in sports at the next level. I think I already have confirmed for that. She's the director of compliance at U of L Athletics. So having a D1 administrator, she should be able to share a lot of great information about the recruiting process, rules, regulations, things to think about. And trying to get, I think I have Coach Karika. Obviously, she has experience as a high school coach, but as a parent. And then one of her daughters will also be there, so you can kind of hear from a D1 student athlete perspective and how that works. I'll have another session on choosing a major, since I get a lot of questions from students about they're not really sure what to do as a major and as an actual career, which is very, understandable. There's just a lot of things they haven't experienced up until this point, so choosing a major is a big thing that causes a lot of anxiety and stress. Then, of course, I'll have an admissions panel. So some different admissions counselors from various colleges and universities from across the state or outside the state that'll be there to kind of do a Q&A with you as well. So that event, like I said, will be taking place at the end of April. Any questions on any of those events? Okay. So I'm somewhat of a pessimist, and I like to start out with the bad information, the negative stuff. If we kind of look at the landscape today of college admissions, you obviously see a lot of stuff in the news, maybe anecdotally you talk to people. The stats aren't really great. So if you look at some of these different stats, a lot of students, or at least a third or so, will actually transfer schools, which causes problems, of course, with credits transferring, just not feeling embedded in the culture of the school, the community. A lot of students changing their major. So I just talked about students have a tough time choosing a major, and they also have a tough time sticking with that major, which is also understandable. This stat's a little bit low. There's different ranges, but usually around 30 to 40% of students, that's it, that'll actually finish in 4 years. And if any of you have started going on college admissions visits, you may have seen they now have a 6-year graduation rate that they show you instead of 4. Just because it's so tough for students now to finish in 4 years. And it's a bit misleading because if a student starts out at school A and they transfer out, that then goes against that school's retention rate, 4-year graduation rate. So it can be a little bit misleading, but still, it can be tough for students to actually finish in 4 years, which of course adds on to student loan debt, which 71% of students will have that. I was just in the personal finance class a couple weeks ago, talking about financial aid with the students, talking about student loan debt, interest rates, things like that. And we had mentioned that $37,000 is now the average student loan debt per student. A couple of years ago, when I was doing that same lesson, it was around 29, 30,000, so it continues to go up. A lot of students will graduate with a job that's not even in their major, which I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing, but it's interesting nevertheless. And then the last one, which you guys love to see, about a third will be living back home with family at some point after college, which maybe that's 6 months, maybe that's 6 years, I don't know. Some of you may already have plans for what you're going to do with your son or daughter's bedroom once they leave. So sometimes those hopes get dashed when they come back to live with you. And a lot of that's because, maybe they're looking for a job after college, or the first job they get, they're just not able to afford to pay rent when they're trying to pay back their student loans at the same time. So like I said, I like to start out with the negative information just because, like I said, I'm kind of a pessimist but also a realist. It's good to kind of keep these things in mind. Then I'll kind of go through here just some different guiding principles. And I don't mean for these things to be kind of preachy, but just in my years of working on the high school side of this, but also the college admission side, there's some things I've kind of picked up that I think could be helpful. The biggest thing is just allowing the students to take a lead in the process, because here in just over a year, it's not going to be you or I, taking care of them. They're going to be on their own. So we're not the ones living in the dorms, waking them up in the morning. We're not in the lecture halls making sure they're not playing games. They're actually taking notes and participating. So if we can start to kind of hand over some responsibilities now, I think that can be really helpful. We don't have to hand over everything right now, but just small things, could be really practical things like doing laundry or making a meal, things like that. And also, it's always good to remember this is the match to be made, not a prize to be won. For some students, they're really just kind of gung-ho on choosing a school that's a top 100 ranked college, which, yeah, has its merits, and that's great. But also, we're kind of looking for a good fit, right? And fit, I always joke, is kind of the big F word we use in college admissions. It's all about fit. So finding something that really checks off all the boxes. Financial, social fit, academic fit, career fit, all those different things. So thinking about not just the first year of getting in, but really the 4 years or beyond, that's always good to remember as well. And I always remind students it's still, in today's society, a great privilege to go to college, especially a 4-year college, because only around 30% of adults 25 and over actually have a 4-year degree. So for a lot of our students, it's just a natural progression going on to college, but for a lot of people, it's not. So I always want to make sure students recognize that. And a good reminder also is to keep their blinders on, and that goes for all of us in the process as well. It's really easy to kind of get distracted by what's going on around us, what this student's doing, or I heard the Jones family, they just did their 27th college visit. We've only done one. Like, we must be really far behind. Or this family, they hired a private college counselor, paying them thousands of dollars to help them through the process. Like, should we be doing that? And so it's easy for us to fall into that, especially as parents, but also students. And I try to remind students, God has a different path for each and every one of them, and they're never going to look the same. So we shouldn't be bothered by the fact that the student next to me is doing something slightly different. So, different roles in the process. Well, going back to what I said about students playing a lead role, obviously we want them to be an active participant. And so these are all different things that students will be doing next year as seniors. They shouldn't really be relying on you to help them with this, but they should be the ones taking care of all these different items, requesting transcripts, asking for letters of recommendation. Also, this is a big one they're going to start seeing, especially since they just took the SAT. Colleges more and more will start to reach out to them, whether by email. Phone calls don't really start until they start applying places. And I know students are petrified of picking up the phone, but still a lot of colleges, that's the primary way they want to communicate. They also use a lot of text messaging now too. But we really want students being the one who's primarily communicating. Obviously, there's a time and place for parents, since you need to know a lot of information to be reaching out to colleges and getting information. But for example, when you guys ever do a college visit, allow your student to be the first person to go in and to greet the person at the desk, introduce themselves. And obviously you're going to ask questions, be active in that visit, but kind of let your student take the lead, since this is really all about them. Of course, they'll be doing all these other things as well, meeting with college reps, going on campus, doing interviews, auditions maybe. And it goes without saying, it seems kind of weird to say it, but students really should demonstrate interest in the colleges that they're interested in. Colleges do track that. They have kind of an engagement score for every student based on how many times the student has been on campus, whether they met an admissions counselor at a college fair or at the high school. They even track, are they opening up the emails that they're sending out? They can also track how many times they open up each individual email. And they'll give an engagement score to every student. And so if it really comes down in a theoretical, situation between two students that are academically about the same, but one student that has a higher engagement score, the college is probably going to want to go with that student versus the other. So colleges, they want to be wanted in a way, So students should really demonstrate their interest in the schools that they're looking at. We always want them to keep our counseling office updated. And by the way, that's Mrs. Delaney back there. So Amy is our administrative assistant. So we do a lot of tracking of information as far as when students are admitted to the school, when they get a scholarship, because we want to celebrate that information first and foremost, but also for very practical things like at the end of the year, senior awards night, graduation, programs, those kind of things you're going to keep forever and ever. We want to make sure we have all the correct information. So they always need to keep us updated. We'd also say be patient. Students are always kind of surprised to find out that they're not going to be able to, make that Instagram post by Thanksgiving or Christmas saying what school they're going to. It really does take a long time to play out by the time you get financial aid. And for example, this year's a little bit crazy for the senior class with the FAFSA and the delays. No senior has received their financial aid yet. So they have no idea how much each college actually is going to cost. And typically May 1st is the deadline. So hopefully that's not the case for you. Hopefully they're working out all the bugs this year and things will be better next year. But really it does take until probably March or April until you have all the information in hand to be able to make a good decision. So it's definitely a marathon, not a sprint. And as always, trying to get students to really express gratitude. That's kind of what we're called to in the Catholic faith, is being grateful even in times and circumstances that aren't great, but always think about all the positive things they have going on in their lives, and to thank those who are helping them. And I'm not really saying me, I'm saying like more so for you guys to, they're going to get annoyed with you at different times in this process. They're going to feel like you're being overbearing, that you're asking too many questions, that they've got it handled even though they don't. But I want them to always just think about the gratitude they should show towards you and others. All right, so for you as parents, kind of the flip side of the student, allowing them to take the lead, which I know can be difficult. You guys know your students better than I do, and we don't want them to make any big mistakes, because this is a pretty big process. There's a lot happening, and there's been a lot of people who now say that this generation of parents, I'm not saying it's true, saying that they're Zamboni parents. It used to be helicopter parents, now they're saying Zamboni. So you all want to be apparently out in front of your child, smoothing the way so that your child never has to face any adversity or any issues. Like I said, that's a generalization, but like I said, if we could start to allow them to take the lead, give them small responsibilities now, when the stakes are low, it'll make things a lot easier next year and beyond. So be supportive and keep an open mind. Just because your student may be looking at colleges or thinking about certain majors that maybe you don't agree with, and obviously you probably know better than them, but allow them to kind of work through that on their own. A lot of times, I just had it last week with a student who wants to go and study, I don't want to even say what the major is, but it's a very low paying job. And she's getting a little bit of pushback from the parents on that, and I'm trying to explain to her probably the rationale for why the parents thinking that. And obviously it comes from a place of caring. You don't want your student to go to college, super expensive, get into a lot of debt, and then have a low paying job and be paying back student loans for the rest of their lives. But I told that student, do your research. Present to them a really good case of why you should pursue this major. And that's kind of a roundabout way of making them do their homework. And then presenting it to you to show that they actually are serious about it. So yeah, just kind of keep an open mind. Obviously step in when you need to, but students kind of have a lot to work through. They'll go through a lot of different ideas, especially senior year and beyond. So just kind of be supportive of that. Of course, like the students, be patient. Jamie McRae is our other counselor here, and she has a senior right now at Assumption High School. So she's been giving the play-by-play from a parent perspective this year, and it's been really interesting to hear. But she was just telling me last week how she had no idea that this would take this long. And like I said, yes, there are some weird factors this year with FAFSA, but she just thought they would have their decision made at this point, and they have all the information. But some of the top-tier scholarships, they might be waiting on, those aren't announced until April or even beyond. So it is a long process. And of course, ask for help when you need it. My biggest fear is that parents won't ask a question because they think it'll be a stupid question, or it's something that they think they should probably already know. If you have a question, just ask. If you ever want to come in for a private meeting, just one-on-one, I know there's lots of things that we don't want to raise our hand and talk about here in this setting, but feel free to set up a meeting with me. I'm happy to do that anytime. And along with that, like, you shouldn't feel like you have to go, get a private college counselor and pay them a bunch of money. Um, so I feel like I can provide all the same information to you free of charge, or at least it's part of your tuition, I suppose. So never hesitate to ask. So these are the things you should not do, and some of them seem kind of funny, but I've seen all these take place. Um, I'm glad I've never been stalked when I worked in college admissions, but I've had colleagues who did have weird stories about people just every single day calling them, showing up at places, wanting to talk to them. Um, we don't want to kind of be weird about it. Um, but I do see parents, I've had them complete college applications. When I worked in college admissions, they're like, okay, and they just sit down their computer and like, okay, I'm filling out the application right now, and it's just not, it's not for you. It's not something you should have to worry about. It really should be for students. Um, and applications are pretty straightforward and easy too. Like, it's definitely something every student can do. A lot of students are really intimidated by the idea of an application, but once they get into it, they find out that it takes like 15, 20 minutes, and a lot of times they can do it on their phone these days. It's not too difficult. Essays, some parents feel like they need to write the essay for the student, and typically we have them do that in their English classes, whether they're taking AP Lang or regular English 12. So that's something they'll do in class. It'll be peer reviewed. The teacher will look over it so they can feel pretty good about it. Because I can remember reading over essays when I worked at admissions, and you could just tell like who the lawyer was and who wasn't. Sometimes some of those essays looked a little bit weird for a 17, 18-year-old to be completing. And this last one, this is mostly my fault because it's kind of my job is to talk about college a lot with the students. But you will find students kind of shut down sometimes when they're constantly being, when they're discussing college and what's happening. Have you made your decision yet? What are you thinking today? So I guess in some ways you can kind of leave that to me, but like I said, sometimes we really don't want students getting kind of burnt out. So some people will say you need to start this college process freshman, sophomore year. I'm not really a believer in that because by the time you get to senior year, you're just exhausted, you're over it. I think this right now is a really good time for them to start looking into it and exploring. But if it's all they think about all 4 years of high school, they're going to miss out a lot on the here and now, you know. All right, so I talked about the infamous F word in college admissions, fit. And so these are different categories that we want parents and students to kind of think about before they make their decision. Obviously, there's a social fit, location, just kind of how the campus culture is, the academic fit, do they have my major, um, do they have internship opportunities, things like that. And that kind of leads into employment as well. So do they have a career services office that's going to help me get internships? Are they going to help me get my first job? Things like that. Help me get connected to alumni. And then, of course, the financial fit. And this tends to be the most important one. It's kind of the crux of every decision. The money talks in almost every situation. And unfortunately, sometimes that becomes a barrier for a student with their dream school. But obviously, finances are a huge part of the decision. I don't know of too many of us that can just open up our checkbook and just write a big check and not have to worry about that aspect. If that's your case, praise be to God. But for most people, it's not. So unfortunately, the financial aspect sometimes becomes the most difficult factor. All right, so a little bit about campus visits. How many of you have done a campus visit already? Just show of hands. Okay, nice. So just kind of the brief of it. They're pretty much available Monday through Saturday throughout the year. You just want to pay attention to their calendar because typically it's opposite of ours. So, they're not going to have the same spring break, and Christmas break is going to be a lot longer for them, things like that. But most of the time you can do it in person. If you can't make it, if it's a far distant college and you're not really in a position to invest the money, you could do a virtual visit. COVID changed a lot for college admissions, so pretty much every college now has a pretty robust virtual visit option, whether it's like a live info session on Zoom that you can engage with, or just like a campus tour, kind of like a Google Street View type thing. Most colleges have that. You might have a large group where you're, put together with a bunch of other families, or it might be very individual, just you and a tour guide. So they can all look a little bit different. But that first initial visit, you're probably going to get a basic info session about the school, and then the general hour and 20-minute campus tour. But I always encourage students to go back. My rule of thumb is probably you want to visit a school at least 2 to 3 times before you make your final decision. because there's always something you can see more than what you saw the first time. So if you do the general visit to start with, next time maybe ask if you can sit in on a class or meet with a professor from the department you're thinking about studying from. Eating lunch, for me, food is a big part of my life, and so I want to make sure the food is something that I'm going to enjoy for the next 4 years. And some schools do have overnight visits, so, colleges are going to show you a very small snapshot when you go on campus. So doing something like an extended visit or overnight visit could be really great to kind of see what other things happen on campus, what are the students doing outside of class times. That can give them a pretty good idea. So sometimes an overnight stay could be a good second or third, fourth visit. And you could just show up on a campus if you want. I wouldn't really advise it unless you're like traveling for vacation and you just happen to be in that area, or you're at like a club sporting event and you're in that area. Go ahead and stop by, stretch your legs, just kind of take a look around campus. But if you really want an individualized experience, you're going to have to register for that on the admissions webpage. So this is just a snapshot of like IU Bloomington. You'll want to go to that webpage in order to register. And so students starting second semester, sophomore year here at Providence, they have 6 excused absences they can use between end of sophomore year and end of senior year. I know students don't want to miss because then they get behind and it's really tough to do that. So in that case, I would recommend a Saturday visit option or over the summer. Some people swear against like summer visits because campuses are kind of like a ghost town. But for some students I found it's really helpful to be in a very quiet, tranquil place where they can kind of close their eyes and kind of take it all in instead of being in the middle of the hustle and bustle between classes. So I think there's value in both of those, but just know that your student does have excused absences they can use. They just need to get a form in the main office. Their teachers have to sign off on it for the day in which they're going to miss. I sign off on it as well. So they need to have that turned in the day before they go on the visit. But any questions about campus visits? Like I said, I know I'm going over a lot of information here, just kind of a surface level. So this is something I do with the students in class sometimes as far as choosing which colleges to go visit or eventually apply to. So this is a College Board website called Big Future. They all have a College Board account. So they can kind of go in, it's kind of like a matchmaking process. They tell it what location they're looking for, like in a radius, how far away do I want to go from home? Do I want a big school, small school? Am I looking for a particular type of school, private, public, religious denomination? All those different things. Do they have my major? And it'll kind of, like I said, match them up with a bunch of schools that fit their criteria. So that could be a good place to start. I feel like most of our students, this is only my second year here, but most of the students here, they kind of travel in herds. They're kind of going to the same 10 or so schools. But if a student has no idea where they want to start, this is a good place to begin with. And there's a lot of other websites as well that all do very similar things. I like the second one here, whether it's niche or niche, I don't know how to pronounce it exactly, but that's a cool website because they actually have current students that actually give reviews on different elements of the campus. And a student can also create an account on that niche website and put in their information about their GPA and eventually their test scores, and it'll give them kind of a predictor for admissions, what their chances are of getting in, how they match up. So that website can be really great. I also want to highlight this. So the Cardinal Newman Society, they have this thing called the Newman Guide. So it's a list of around 20 colleges that are very deeply rooted in the Catholic faith. Yes, there's hundreds of Catholic colleges and universities out there, but these colleges are a little bit different. They meet a certain criteria. They're just very faithfully Catholic. So their Catholic heritage is very pronounced. It's intertwined in every part of the school's campus, and also the faculty. So a lot of these schools, 100% of the faculty take an oath to the magisterium of the Catholic Church. So if your student is looking for a very faithfully Catholic college, very Orthodox, this would be a good fit for them. So they can check out some of those schools. So what's important to colleges and doing a little bit of comparison with yourself. Some of you may have already come across these, but basically if you go to Google and you were to type in college's name, and then next to it, admitted student profile. You might get something similar to this. So colleges will show you for the last class that was on campus, just got admitted, just started in the fall. For example, this is IU Bloomington, by the way. It'll give you a range and an average for GPAs and test scores. It's not always helpful for students to compare themselves to other students, and something like this really kind of surprises students a bit about like IU Bloomington, you know, our state flagship school, just because if you look at that SAT, that's a pretty strong SAT score. You know, the national average is around 1040, 1050, so they're well above that. But one thing to kind of take into account is the world of test optional admissions. So most of your colleges now, over 80% are test optional. So with that being said, IU Bloomington, 46% applied as test optional, so almost half. So you have to kind of assume the numbers are kind of inflated in a way, because you're only getting the students with the strongest test scores that are submitting those. But like I said, checking out an admitted student profile can be somewhat helpful. And here's another one that a lot of people don't look at or know exists. But same thing, if you go to Google and you type in a school's name and then next to it put common data set, it's kind of weird language. But colleges have this huge report, and in section C of every one of these reports, it's all about first-time admissions. So it's going to give you a ton of information about their school, including, they may look a little bit different at every school, but this is a chart kind of showing you what the colleges deems very important, all the way down to not considered. They have academic factors and non-academic. And like I said, every college is going to be a little bit different on what they really care about, what things are important to them. Most every college is going to say the rigor of their transcript, their GPA are going to be most important. And after that, it kind of just varies. A lot of schools, you know, for like test scores and all that, you know, are important. Sometimes they're not even considered. And then you have your non-academic factors as well. I mentioned, I think, earlier about showing interest. So yeah, this bottom one, level of applicants' interest. So this school doesn't even consider that. And this is U of L, by the way. This is Louisville's common data set. Most times it's only public schools that will publish this information. But I think that can also be helpful to see what does each school think is really important and what things do they not even consider. Some schools care a lot about your residence, state residency, things like that. Some consider the essay, some don't. You know, I think for like Purdue, I think they have test scores. It's very important. Purdue is one of the schools this past year that now requires test scores to be submitted again, whereas IU did not make that change, and most others have not made it either. But that's just one other thing you guys can kind of take a look at if you want to get kind of deep in the weeds. Do anyone have any questions on these admitted student profile or common data sets? A little bit about testing. So while it is true that most colleges are test optional, I think it's still a great idea for students to retest. So as you probably know, last week all the juniors took the SAT. And so hopefully everyone did well on that. But regardless, they should probably retake it over the summer. That's a really good timeline. So June 1st, there's an SAT administration. And I'm also including ACT. A lot of students don't even consider the ACT. When colleges, they don't have a preference, either one, but I found that some students do better on one versus the other. I was one of those students. I did much better on the ACT, even though I bombed the science section, just because there is a dedicated science section on ACT. So if your student is thinking about going into a science field, or they're just naturally gifted in that area, they should take a look at the ACT as well. The biggest thing I see with our senior class is that they never retake any of those. They just take that one here at school, and that's it. So I think it's kind of a missed opportunity. And I'm not saying you have to take it a million times, but maybe 2 or 3 times would be good to kind of give yourself a chance to do well, because I think there are a lot of opportunities, especially financial opportunities, that are still out there for the students, you know, the half of students or so that are submitting test scores. So it can open up some doors. But we do have a lot of students that struggle with standardized testing, and that's okay too. So I think there's a path for every student, regardless of how they do on these exams. But I think each and every person, unless they get a perfect 1600, they should probably retake the SAT and look into taking the ACT. Has anyone had your child already take these before the one we did last week? Yeah.
I was going to ask you, how do we find out where?
Yeah, you just go straight to their websites. So if you just like Google SAT, so that's through College Board and then ACT.org. That's where you would go and register. They're typically, what, 60, 70 bucks or so to register. We're not a test site. They're usually on Saturdays at some of the other public schools around here, or Ivy Tech, or across the river at U of L's campus. But unfortunately, Providence is not a testing site on the weekend administrations. But yeah, you'd have to go straight to those websites to register. Any other questions about testing? Yeah.
I will say, like the ACT, I'm not sure the SAT, but the first time they take the ACT, anytime you can pay a little more to get a more detailed report,
Right.
and then they can use that to focus their study for the next time. And I thought that was worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll show you kind of the things you were kind of weak in, the areas
But
where
it is
they're.
an extra.
Yeah. Yeah, and usually with the SAT, they can connect their College Board account, which they all have a College Board account with Khan Academy, and they can kind of do similar things with the PSAT they took in the fall, the areas in which they were kind of needing some remediation in. So there's some free resources, or like you said, yeah, the ACT does have that. If you're curious about getting some test prep, there are some outside providers that some of our students use. I can't really recommend one over the other, but I can at least give you some that we hear about. People that reach out to me offering their services to our students. Sometimes those are just like a short term, like a couple weeks leading up to an exam. We'll let them take a full length practice test, things like that. But there are a lot of free resources online as well. But if you want to know about any local providers, I can help you with that. They tend to be across the river in Louisville. A lot of it's ACT. There's some SAT. But I think any test prep is good test prep. And I also have old-fashioned, big, fat textbooks in my office if they want to work through that. I mean, they're all up to date, 23, 24, but still. So financial aid, I mentioned a lot of you had questions about that. So I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about financial aid. And just to give you an idea, we pretty much do two separate full-length events in the fall for you as parents for financial aid. We'll do kind of a general financial aid night. Then after that, we can do like a workshop style where like you bring your laptop in and we have professionals that can help you file the FAFSA if you need help with that. So we do a lot of programming in the fall for senior parents, but I think it's important to just kind of go over some of this. And you've seen some of these different terms used before, sometimes interchangeably, but your scholarships, a lot of times that's based on the student's merit, which typically means everything on their transcript, the grades they've earned in high school, their GPA, test scores, things like that. So those are typically, if they get a scholarship for college, that's renewable all 4 years as long as they stay in positive academic standing, something they're not going to have to repay back. Grants are similar, that they don't have to be repaid, but that's based on financial need, which typically is determined by the FAFSA. Loans, of course, do need to be repaid. You might see employment opportunities like work-study. That's also a form of financial aid. Students can work part-time jobs on campus and earn money while they're in school. And kind of the basics of financial aid, where it's coming from. Your three main sources are going to be, first off, the institution they're applying to. So for a lot of students, the college that they're applying to for admission also at the same time qualifies them for institutional scholarships. Sometimes there's a separate application. A lot of times though, it's just applying for admission will also, have you screened to see if you qualify for any scholarships. So the institution by far is the biggest source of financial aid, so we always want to exhaust that first. The government can also provide financial aid, and that's once again determined through the FAFSA, which is a free application for federal student aid, which for you guys will revert back to October 1st is when that'll be available. It looks a lot different than it has in the past, so if you've done it for years now, you're going to find it's a lot shorter. It went from 108 questions down to about 36. There's been some different changes. I won't say for the better, but some changes nonetheless. But like I said, that will determine if you're eligible for any federal money or state money. And for a lot of students, anyone who applies for the FAFSA, regardless of if you're eligible for any free money or not, everyone does get a loan option from the government for $5,500 for that first year. of college. But some people might get a Pell Grant for your families with high need. So that's a big chunk of money, upwards of $8,000. The state of Indiana also has some grants as well, the Frank O'Bannon grant, and some other things. And the institution that you're applying to, when they get the FAFSA, when they get that report, they may add some grants onto your financial aid as well, outside of that merit scholarship that I talked about. And then, of course, we have outside sources of money. There's a bunch of different websites, like FastWeb has been around for millions of years. College Board has a good scholarship service. And then Going Merry is another good one, where basically a student creates a profile, and then it matches them with scholarships they might qualify for. But those are nationwide scholarships typically, and so your chances of earning those are a little bit slimmer. So what we do, and I should have probably pulled it up, but you can get to it from our homepage, but we have a link to an Excel spreadsheet where we list all the scholarships that we receive from local and regional agencies. And so we always point families to that document, and it has information about the award, how much it's about, where to get more information. We print off applications in our office. So we try to do a pretty good job of connecting students with scholarships they might qualify for. And there's some pretty big ones locally and statewide. Of course, you probably heard of the Lilly Scholarship. So that is a part of the Community Foundation of Southern Indiana Scholarship, which opens up typically mid-August. So that's like right off the bat. I try to get in the classroom in August to talk about college applications, but also that scholarship application, just because it's typically opening mid-August and closing mid-September. And that could qualify them for the Lilly Scholarship, which is full ride to any private or public school in the state of Indiana. And you probably have even known of some previous Providence students who have been awarded that. But there's a number of other scholarships as part of that application. But that's just one scholarship of many that we have listed for students. Another thing about scholarships and financial aid is there is a difference between sticker price and net price. If you were to go on any college's website right now and look at their total price tag, it's enough to make you faint and you get sick. The important thing to remember is really no students are actually paying that amount. You know, it's kind of like buying a new car. Typically, you're not going to actually pay what's listed. So we don't want that to really necessarily scare you off at this point from a college. Like, still do a visit, go through that process, see what it looks like. But I understand how there is a bit of sticker shock with most colleges. But the important thing is to remember no one's actually paying that, and don't let that be a deterrent. The important part of the FAFSA is you might leave money on the table if you don't do it. And another big, really practical reason is if your student is applying to private schools, there is some negotiation involved. Public schools, not so much. Here's our offer, take it or leave it. Your private schools, though, you have some negotiation power. And most people don't even ask about it, or even, attempt to get some money off. But if your student's applying to a private school, even just one private school, I typically encourage the student and you all to have them apply to multiple private schools that are kind of similar in size and type, because they will compare themselves to one another. And so when we get into the spring and financial aid season, if there's a school you really want to go to, but if it's looking a little bit too expensive and you have other good competitive offers, you can take those offers to that college and they will do a reconsideration of your aid. But they will not even start that process unless you have a FAFSA on file. So even though I know a lot of people hate the FAFSA, it's not really helpful in a lot of cases. It can be helpful if you're trying to negotiate for more money, because that's just a non-negotiable. They have to have a FAFSA on file for your students in order to do any of those financial aid reconsiderations. Colleges are not Walmart. They don't have a price match guarantee, but having some other good competitive offers can be really helpful. And even if it's just $1,000 they can add on to a package, that's every single year. So just by asking a question or sending an email, you could end up having $4 grand more in your pocket, which I would say is probably worth it. So please let me know once we get to that point if you have questions about it. But if your student is applying to at least one private school, make sure they're applying to multiples. Even if they're not sincerely interested in those other ones, let's go ahead and apply there just to see what they're going to give you. Because in a way, you guys are all consumers in this process. So just like if you're shopping around for car insurance, chances are you're going to go to multiple different agencies and see what they can offer you. Same thing with private colleges, right? And a big part of this is holding the deposit. So once a student is admitted, sometimes in that same paperwork, they will also ask you to put down a couple $100 deposit to basically confirm your place in the next class. I'm not saying it will hurt you, but it probably won't help to put down a deposit and then a few months later ask for more money. Because in a way, you've already committed, they already have you. Yes, it's just a couple $100, you can walk away, but like, don't lose negotiation power. That's the leverage you have. So don't put down a deposit too early. I know this is like way far in the future, but just let you know, some people automatically put down their deposit right away, and like they haven't even seen the financial aid yet, and it just doesn't really make sense. Colleges will try to scare you that, oh, we're running out of room in our dorms, or you better do it now if you want to get the best room possible. A lot of those are just kind of scare tactics. Like, you really shouldn't make any deposit until you feel 100% about a certain decision. Does that kind of make sense? So I know that's a very brief overview of scholarships. Do we have any specific questions about scholarships or paying for college? There's a ton I did not go over, but for time's sake, we're just kind of moving right along. One thing you could do right now, every college by federal law has to have this thing called a net cost calculator on their website. So go to their financial aid webpage. You can put information about yourself and your students, your income, the student's GPA, stuff like that, and it'll spit out kind of a general number of like, here's what you can expect from us based on the information you gave us. You know, it's not true science, but it gives you somewhat of an idea of where you could be at financially. But like I said, don't let that deter you or the student from pursuing a college if it looks like it has all the things you want, because you never know truly how things are going to shake out. But if you want to get an early preliminary kind of offer to kind of see what the cost would look like, you could do a net cost calculator. All right, so I know I'm getting close to the end here. Here's just kind of a quick overview of kind of what the timeline looks like during senior year, just so you can kind of look ahead a little bit. Applications open up August 1st. Students can apply one of two main ways, going to the college's website, or they can use the Common App. So commonapp.org is a website that theoretically your student could go home today, fill out the entire thing, and just be ready to go in August. Obviously, they can't hit submit just yet, but they could get pretty much 90% of it done now. So that might be something I have the students do this spring to get them started working on that. They'll be asking for letters of recommendation. There'll be college admission visitors coming here to Providence. They might be retaking the ACT and SAT. I mentioned Community Foundation scholarships become available during that time frame. There's a number of college fairs they could go to as well. We hosted our first one this last fall, and the plan is to do the same thing again this fall. That seemed to be a good event. October 1st, like I mentioned, that's when the FAFSA opens up. Students start to see the first deadlines. Typically, November 1st is the big deadline for IU, Purdue, Bellarmine, Hanover. Those are some of the top colleges our students are applying to. So I always tell students, if you apply by Halloween, you're pretty much good for all your schools. So keep that in mind. Still doing visits, starting to look at scholarships. You're going to start to receive some of those admissions decisions. There's really no benefit to applying on August 1st because students also need a transcript to be sent to every college, and we can't even send those out until mid-August anyway. I had to look yesterday. September 13th was the first decision the student got back this year, and that was to U of L. They have a pretty quick turnaround. But yeah, October, November, that's a big time when students might start hearing back from schools. In December, a lot of the same things, getting their admission decisions, retaking the SAT, ACT. A lot of colleges, the December ACT, SAT is the very last one they will consider for admission and scholarship purposes. Some places like Louisville, you can test all the way through the spring to update them and to try to qualify for additional scholarships. But for a lot of schools, December is kind of the last call. And going back to that gratitude, I always want students to remember to write thank you letters for their teachers. I've also, in my one-on-one meetings, I've encouraged them to go ahead and ask a teacher before they leave for the summer, this spring, if they'd be willing to write a letter for them, just because some teachers, as you can imagine, are pretty popular and they get asked by a ton of students. So it would be good for them to go ahead and start thinking about a teacher. And by the way, who should that teacher be? Probably a teacher that obviously knows them really well. Typically a teacher in the core subject area, so math, science, English, social studies. If a student's looking at art school or the performing arts, sure, art teachers or theater teachers might be good, but no offense to any of the PE teachers, they're probably not going to be the best person to ask for a letter. Some schools don't even want any letters. They don't consider them at all. Sometimes, like IU Bloomington, I think gives you 1 or 2 optional letters that you can submit. Sometimes they need a letter from me as the counselor. Sometimes they don't. That's what you're going to find with colleges. They're all a little bit different, which makes it a bit frustrating on what they want, what they need. And the deadlines are different for every school. And then a big time frame is just January to April. So any final applications, they could be submitting those. They typically are going to start to receive their full financial aid packages at this time. You might get some by Christmas, which would be great. Some of your small schools can get those submitted out to you quicker. But a lot of times it's not until the spring when you actually see that full financial aid package and you can see, here's what my bottom line cost is going to be for my son or daughter to attend that school next year. Students, we still want them doing final visits in the spring. And a lot of times colleges have dedicated events just for admitted students, which can be really good for them to meet other prospective students who have been admitted. Maybe they find their roommate at one of these events. But the spring of senior year is still a good time to be doing those visits. And of course, letting Amy and I know about what schools they've been accepted to and when they make their final decision, just because we put all of that into the end of the year programs. And then May 1st. So if you think about the application season, August 1st it opens up, and May 1st is when it closes. That's when students need to make their decisions and notify all their other schools that they're not considering them anymore. So that's when those deposits need to be put in place. If a student needs more time, they just need to communicate that with their admissions counselor. And I probably have mentioned admissions counselors. Those are people in every college that are dedicated to a certain geographic area. So every college is going to have someone that works directly with Providence students. So anytime you have questions about anything, that's always your go-to person is that admissions counselor. So they'll be the one primarily communicating with you and your son or daughter. They should be, like I said, your point person to ask any questions about that school. And then, of course, finish strong. It goes without saying, but students that get admitted in the fall, they still have to do well in the spring because colleges can always rescind offers. Students sometimes forget about that. The senioritis sets in a bit, and they kind of let go of things. And so I haven't seen that too often, but just know that that's always a possibility. And so we want students to finish strong at the end of senior year. So I went a few minutes over time, but now would be a good time if you guys have any questions. Yeah.
My question is, like, when you're doing the application process, if your child has an AP and college
Dual credit.
How does that process work? How do you know what they're going to accept
Right.
or not accept?
In most colleges, you would have to go to the registrar's webpage, and sometimes they have a self-service option. You can say, I took this AP exam and I got this score. I took this dual credit class through Ivy Tech and I got this grade. And it'll shoot out to you on their side of things what it counts for on their end. So that's kind of a self-service option. When students are applying to these different colleges, it'll ask them if they've taken coursework that's AP or dual credit. And sometimes those colleges will then turn around and say, hey, we need a transcript from Ivy Tech or IU if they took ACT. But truly, they don't need that until a student makes their final decision. Because you're going to have to pay money for those transcripts and school reports from AP. You should really only do that once your student has made their final decision. Because really, colleges use that for orientation and building their schedule for the fall. So they don't really need it while they're going through the application process. But during the application process itself, students will mention if they've taken that type of coursework. And of course, they're going to see it on the transcripts also. But eventually, when students graduate, they do need to go to their Ivy Tech account, to their IU account. Now we have Ball State dual credit, so they go into the Ball State account and send in those transcripts to the colleges. They don't automatically take it off the high school transcript. And so I go over all that with seniors. Because the worst thing that could happen is a student takes all these dual credit classes and then they just fail to request a transcript from that college and they miss out. They have to retake classes. That would be pretty dumb. But it happens every year, unfortunately.
Okay.
But I'll make sure you guys know about it and the students know about that process at the end of senior year.
Do most of the colleges have that website where you can kind of tell?
Yeah, like I said, the registrar's webpage, that would be the one to look for. Or the admissions counselor you're working with, sometimes you can run it through them and say, here's all the classes I've taken, can you tell me what it translates to on your side? So the admissions counselor, you can put them to work. That's their job as well. Um, so always rely on them first and foremost. What you could do, like I said, go on the registrar's website. And typically they have an option. And most of the dual credit classes we have here are on the core transfer library, so they're guaranteed to transfer in any public school and most private schools in Indiana as well. But they're all pretty general, so they should transfer without problem. Yeah.
First, thank you. I noticed, I also want to say thanks for Providence thinking about an e-learning day on April 8th. That's
Right.
the day of the eclipse.
Right.
Be a great time to go. I just think it'd be a great time to go to like any school that's in the totality, like
Right.
Livingston or Muncie. So just very just something to think about.
Yeah.
You had mentioned the cost or the debt of a student is like 37,000 now versus 29.
Yeah,
So is that percentage kind of in relationship to, do you know, if is that where colleges have gone up in price, or is that just debt where people can't pay?
Yeah, and one thing that's kind of surprising is that at public four-year colleges, the tuition has not really gone up much in the past 10 to 20 years. It's kind of crazy to say that. It's the room and board typically that it goes up. But your private schools, that's where you've seen the drastic skyrocketing of prices. So I think that has a lot to do with it. I can't really account for why the number keeps going up, other than probably four-year graduation rates are declining. Yeah, it's kind of hard to say. I think COVID probably over the last couple of years, students not finishing up on time or learning loss due to COVID, people taking time off during those years, then never going back. I mean, there's probably a host of issues of why that's happened.
And lastly, is it, you may have mentioned this, but is it possible to get this presentation?
Yeah, I'm gonna send it out. I'll
Okay.
send out the recording and also the actual PDF,
Okay.
so you guys have it. Other questions? Yeah.
I know you had sent an email out, it's been a little while ago, you're gonna meet individually
Yes.
with the juniors this school year.
Right.
Do they know ahead of time when they're gonna meet with you?
Not really. No, I also have to rely on the teachers and their availability to sit students down, depending on what they have going on in class. Sometimes they're not able to if they're taking a test, for example. But really, it's kind of first come, first served. Students have the option to raise their hand and say, I want to go down and see them. But I'll get around to every student by the end of the spring for sure. But right now, it's just kind of whatever student wants to volunteer to come down and see me. Any other questions? Okay, like I said, April 25th is that evening program. Like I said, we'll probably start here, and then you guys will be able to move around and choose which session you want to go to. So hopefully we'll see you at that. But if you have any questions in the meantime, if you want to come in and have a private meeting and talk about your child's situation, what you guys are thinking, questions you might have, just feel free to reach out anytime. I'm happy to meet with you all. All right, well, thank you guys for coming in. Thanks. Feel free to get some coffee on your way out.